Hi everybody in Abnormal Psychology, Psych 266. Today we do two chapters that you'll see are kind of related but not completely. There's some different topics here. Chapters 14 and 15. Chapter 14, Disruptive Impulse Control and Conduct Disorders. It used to all be part of one chapter in the DSM-4 called Childhood Disorders. And then some of these impulse conditions were listed separately, but we're not worried about that. This is the way it is in the DSM-5. So if you like to follow along in the book with me, pages 380 to 382, oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder. Two childhood conditions. I'm going to try to make it simple for you. Attitude, behavior. Oppositional defiant disorder is a poor attitude. Conduct disorder is poor behavior. But you might have guessed it gets more complicated than that. Children with oppositional defiant disorder, they have a really bad attitude. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. I'm not going to follow any rules. I'll do things the way I want to do it. Aren't most kids like that? Especially teenagers. Well, what's that M word we were using in class every week? Maladaptive. Is it so bad that you're getting arrested for swearing at police officers, kicked out of school for your horrible attitude toward the teachers and the principal? Then it's maladaptive. But here's what I want you to know. Kids who have this, they're usually worse at home. That's not a shocker, is it? It means you have a more severe case if you're treating teachers and other adults that way. But it usually starts at home, and it's usually worse at home. But the question of whether you're just a typical teenager or you have this condition is how maladaptive is it? How much trouble is it getting you in? Conduct disorder, poor behavior, lying, cheating, stealing, especially mean things. Being mean to much younger children or disabled children, robbery, forcing things away from people. It's not one thing, conduct disorder. It's on a spectrum of how bad is it. So poor behavior. Now, here's something that'll be on the test. 80%, not 18, 80% of kids with conduct disorder, well, they used to have oppositional defiant disorder. Whether they were diagnosed or not, it starts with a poor attitude 80% of the time, and it turns into poor behavior. Now, not every kid with oppositional defiant disorder is going to turn into a kid with conduct disorder and do illegal and mean things, but most of the kids with conduct disorder used to have oppositional defiant disorder. Now, when it comes to conduct disorder, the age of 10 really matters. If you're already doing mean things and illegal things by the time you're 10, that's not a good sign. That means that it's probably going to get worse as you become an adolescent and a teenager. Next thing that's an impulse control and disruptive disorder, page 384 and 385, we're talking about intermittent explosive disorder. Here's what happens. You're normal, you're average, you're chill, whatever, and then all of a sudden you explode in anger. Now, doesn't that seem like a lame excuse for people who want to hit people and break stuff? Well, here's the deal. Usually the damage they do is to themselves and their own property. Not only that, they're usually very sorry after it happens. So that's what tells us they're not really doing it on purpose, especially if it's self-harm and breaking their own possessions. Here's what I want you to know. Usually it is males, not females. Usually it is people with less than a high school education. Usually it's people under 30. So do we have a profile for who the typical person is? Yes, a young, uneducated male. Much more likely to have intermittent explosive disorder. But one more thing, they also usually have experienced trauma in their childhood. Either they were the victim of abuse or they watched mom and dad hitting each other. So you add that in, and there's the profile. The last two are on page 387 and 3 90 in this chapter, pyromania and kleptomania. What's the difference? Pyromania is fire setting and kleptomania is stealing. Once again, aren't these diagnoses just lame excuses for people who want to set stuff on fire, pyromania, and people who want to steal your stuff or shoplift, kleptomania? Well, here's the thing. With pyromania, a lot of experts would say, but wait a minute, if a cop was standing right next to you, would you have done that? Same thing with kleptomania. Would you have acted that way if an officer was right there? Probably not. But is it an impulse like some people have with biting their nails that you just can't control? Well, then you would have one of these two conditions. People with pyromania, it's not like they would necessarily set a fire if a police officer was right next to them, but almost like an alcoholic. If there's alcohol in front of you, you're going to drink it. Well, somebody with pyromania, if there's any kind of way to set a fire, matches, a lighter, whatever, they're going to use it. Not only that, when they were little kids, they were like obsessed with fire. Now, not every little kid who wants to be a fireman or firefighter ends up with pyromania. But those who have it, that's what they were like when they were young, and even as adults, they're obsessed with anything related to fire. Kleptomania, stealing things, but here's the thing, that you don't need. So, if you steal some video game and you're a kid because you wanted that video game, that's not kleptomania. I've dealt with people, in fact, a student in this very class a few years ago told me his daughter will take anything that's not nailed down, and one time he even noted that she took someone's salt and pepper shakers from their house when they went to dinner to a friend's house. What do you need those for? Nothing. A kid that I saw with the juvenile court stole houseplants from the front of Home Depot. You know, they have like a display outside the front door. He didn't need those for anything. So oftentimes they will bring it back and apologize. They'll throw it in a dumpster because what they took they don't need. Uncontrollable stealing. But remember, pyromania and kleptomania are controversial because some experts say you would never do that in front of a police officer. So therefore, maybe it's not a disorder. That is one way of thinking. Kleptomania, much more of a girl thing. I think that's interesting. And a female thing in adulthood too. But with kids, it's more of a female thing, 2-to-1. And it remains that way with adults, but maybe not quite the same percentage. That's chapter 14. Chapter 15 is substance-related conditions, and kind of related because it has to do with impulses, but yet still different as a topic. So, using psychoactive substances, things that are active on your mind, any drug or alcohol or anything. We're going to get into the specifics here in a minute. There are 4 levels. Use, you consume it. Intoxication, you do too much and it makes you sick, physically or mentally or both. Abuse, you have a pattern of overdoing it. And dependence, also known as addiction, you can't stop. So we'll get into that in a little bit here. First of all, this will be a test question, page 395. In the DSM-5, there are over 300 different substance-related conditions. Wow, that's a lot. How do you know when a person really has a problem? Again, maladaptive. As your book says on 395 and 396, the negatives outweigh the positives. That is how we can tell. So, 2 symptoms to be dependent. However, really, most people have most of these. You try to quit and you don't. You use it excessively. You use it at times that could get you in trouble or even killed, like when you're driving. But what I want you to know specifically, tolerance and withdrawal. You need more and more of it to get the same high or the same effect. That is tolerance. And withdrawal, when you don't have it, you can feel it. Now, if you can't relate to this, think of food. If you go an hour or two without food, you're probably fine. What about 6, 8, or 10 hours? You can feel it. Your brain and body start to crave it. Well, some people are like that with their heroin, their meth, their pot, their alcohol. They crave it. 10% of the US population would have a maladaptive dependent pattern with alcohol. Yes, alcohol is that prevalent and that common, and therefore 10% of all people really feel like they need it and they can't live without it, and they need more and more to feel the same drunkenness. Here's the thing though, if you drink for years and years and years, you start to blow out your liver and other vital organs, and they deteriorate. You get conditions like Korsakoff syndrome, and then you need less alcohol. That's not a good sign. That's a bad sign. That means your liver and other organs are starting to fail you. So, alcohol. What I want you to know next is, skipping all the way to page 409, if you like to follow along in the book, remission. What if you're able to quit one of these substances that you feel like you need? If you can stay away from it for 3 months, we say you are in remission. Not necessarily that you've quit for good, but it's a good start. And then 1 year is called sustained remission. That means that you are keeping away from it for a long period of time. Those are the definitions. 3 months remission, 1 year sustained remission. Page 409. If you like to follow along in the book, I'm skipping to 416. Caffeine. Here's what I want you to know. The most widely used psychoactive substance. Why? Several reasons. One, there's no restrictions. Even kids can buy caffeine. It's not socially frowned upon. If someone is like shooting up heroin with a needle in front of you, that might really disturb you and offend you. Someone has a Coke or a Pepsi or a Mountain Dew or a cup of coffee or an iced tea, not nearly as offensive, huh? And the cost of it too. It is cheaper than a lot of illegal drugs. You know, you can buy a whole thing of iced tea, coffee, soda for a lot cheaper than you can other substances. What about using caffeine to counterbalance the effects of alcohol? It's a myth. It doesn't work. Research tells us you become an agitated drunk. You might see that on TV shows and movies. Oh, this person is so drunk, give them black coffee or whatever. Doesn't work, according to research. You're still drunk, but an agitated drunk. Next condition that we're going to talk about related to substances is cannabis, marijuana, on page 420. Do you think that's an accident? Me neither. Page 420, cannabis. Here's what I want you to know about marijuana. It is measured with THC as the barometer instead of proof, which is alcohol. The amount of THC will determine the strength of the marijuana, also known as cannabis, that the person is using. Now, as you know, there is a big debate about whether marijuana should be legal or whether it should just be medical marijuana or perhaps none available legally at all. One argument to making it legal, especially with medical marijuana, at least then it can be determined exactly what you're buying, what's in it, and the THC levels. But of course, anything that you make legal, this is the other side of the argument, more people use it. So therefore, sure, people would use alcohol if it was illegal, but way more if you can just buy it anywhere pretty much. So there really are two sides to that debate. Page 420, cannabis, marijuana. Moving right along, hallucinogens, page 426 and 427. Things that make you hallucinate. Shrooms, acid, you've probably heard of things like that. I want you to know only one thing. The high usually lasts between 4 to 6 hours. That's usually what happens. Skipping now to page 435 in your book, inhalants, things that go typically through your nose and into your lungs. Now, here's what I want you to know. This is much more of a young person thing to do. There's plenty of adults who do this, but the peak is usually around 14 years old. We see this more in poor kids, low socioeconomic status. Anything they can get their hands on that will give them an instant high, they'll sniff. When I was a kid, it was whiteout. People don't use that anymore because nobody types on a typewriter, but that stuff would give people a high. There are pens that have an odor that make people high. I've heard of aerosol cans that kids use, gas and lighter fluid, which is pretty dangerous, by the way, but all kinds of things that kids sniff to feel an instant high. We see this more in minority populations than Caucasian populations for some reason, much more in males than females. Males are risk taker anyway. Like I said, lower socioeconomic, poor kids, underprivileged. So what would be the profile? A young minority male who comes from a disadvantaged background and uses something that they can sniff to get high. Sometimes you inhale it through your mouth, but usually it's sniffing it. That would be the profile. Opioids. This is on page 439. Heroin, but now there's newer classes that people use in pill form, or crushing up the pills and snorting them, or smoking them, things like Percocets and fentanyl, but your book talks about heroin specifically, so that's what we will talk about here. The most addictive. It is hard to quit. And certainly Percocet and fentanyl are too, and those can be deadly. Page 439. Now, if you're following along in the book, we are going to skip all the way to page 450. Stimulants. What usually happens when people do meth or any other kind of stimulant, they will get a high that, believe it or not, can last for a half day all the way up to 3 days. That's a pretty big window of time. It depends on the potency of the drug and the person. But usually they will get that high for that long, half day to 3 days, and then they will crash. And it could mean literally crashing your car, but it also means your body and your mind. You will have, sleepiness, maybe even unresponsiveness where you need to be brought to the hospital. Not good stuff. Last thing, page 461, tobacco. Tobacco comes in all forms, as you know. You don't usually see people smoking pipes like you did generations ago, but certainly people smoke and use nicotine in all kinds of other ways. What I want you to know is this. It is approximately 19, not 90, 19% of all adults in America that use nicotine or tobacco. That number is substantially down from generations past for multiple reasons. For example, it's more expensive than it used to be. It's more socially unacceptable. People might not want to be around you while you're using. It's less convenient. You can no longer use tobacco in places like schools, colleges and universities, airplanes, restaurants. So for a variety of reasons, and people now understand the health risks more than others, nicotine use has gone down. So you now have enough information. We've done all the chapters to allow you to take exam number 4 whenever you choose to do so. We only have 2 more of these videos left to go. In fact, I'm going to make myself a note right now, and then we will be done with everything. Take care. That's it for now.